Chapter 1. The Woman Who Called Me Son. The lights inside the Georgia State Capitol were brighter than usual. Not harsh, not grand, just warm, gentle. As if they were trying to expose every wrinkle on the face of the woman sitting beside me. Loretta Mae Johnson. No one in that room knew who she was. She wore a simple navy blue cotton dress. No makeup, no name tag. Just a woman ordinary, unnoticed, uncelebrated. But to me, she was anything but ordinary. She was the memory my heart held on to long after my mind let it go. Marcus D. Ellison, the first black governor of this state, stood behind the podium, my voice trying hard not to crack. The whole state was watching. News cameras live, reporters, senators, pastors, civil rights leaders. They expected a policy announcement, a new economic plan, maybe an education initiative. But no, I wasn't there to announce anything. I came to return a name to a woman the world had forgotten. She used to mop floors at a public hospital. I began, eyes fixed on the frail hand trembling beside mine. But before that, she wiped the tears of a child who had just lost his mother. She had no degree, no accolades, but she had something most people in this room do not: the heart of a mother without needing to share a single drop of blood. The room went still. I didn't need my notes. What I had to say wasn't written on paper. It lived in the broken memories I thought I'd buried long ago. When my birth mother died from illness, I was just a boy, clutching a blue wool scarf every night. My family fell apart. Relatives fought over who'd take me in. But there was one person who didn't argue. She simply reached out her hand and said, "Let the boy stay with me, just tonight." And from that night on, I had a second mother. The cameras slowly panned toward Loretta. She said nothing, but her eyes glistened. For 2 years, she raised me. She put me to sleep with stories of clever rabbits outsmarting hungry wolves. She cooked me spicy cornbread just like Mama used to make. And every time I woke up crying from a dream, she'd hold me and whisper, "It's okay, baby Marcus. Mama's right here." I turned to face her. I forgot her. Because life swept me away. Status, success, power. But there's one thing I remember clearly today. She was the first person who taught me what was right, before I could even read. And she was the first to tell me, you don't need to share someone's last name to be loved like their child. In that moment, Loretta looked at me. Her eyes were bright like the breeze back home before sunrise. "My baby boy, you came back," she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. The chamber erupted applause, tears, emotion flooding every corner. But for me, the only sound left was the beating of my own heart. I turned back to the mic and smiled gently. Today, I'm not just a governor, I'm a son, and the mother I once forgot is sitting right here beside me. And if you're wondering, how does a man like me, a governor, call a janitor Mom? It all began on an ordinary morning, with a choice I never planned to make. A quiet step down the hallway of Grady Memorial Hospital. and there I heard a voice I thought I had lost forever. Chapter 2: The Hospital Without Cameras. If you're still wondering how a governor like me could ever call a janitor mom, know this. It didn't start with a speech. It wasn't crafted by an advisor, and it damn sure wasn't part of any media plan. It started on an ordinary morning. The sky over Atlanta was gray that day, heavy with clouds. My schedule packed, just like always. 9 a.m., meeting with the state health director. 10 a. Hospital reform briefing. 11 a. Press conference. I skipped them all. No security detail, no aides, no advanced notice. I simply told my driver, "Take me to Grady Memorial, and don't tell anyone." He looked at me through the rearview mirror, didn't ask why. Maybe he saw something in my eyes, something that wasn't political, something that wasn't power. Maybe he saw a boy who once walked hospital halls, holding the hand of a mother who was slowly slipping away. The gates of Grady looked old. The walls were cracked. A line of patients stretched from the ER all the way to the pharmacy. I wasn't wearing a suit, just a wrinkled blue shirt and a pair of worn-out shoes. Nobody recognized me except the hospital director, who'd been alerted last minute and came running, short of breath. "Governor Ellison, if we had known you were coming, we would have..." I raised my hand gently, cutting him off. "I didn't come here to be received. I came to see what it looks like when there are no cameras." We walked through the corridors. Patients crammed together on faded plastic chairs. Some lay curled on the floor, wrapped in thin hospital blankets. Crying children, clacking shoes, names being called over the PA. It all blended into a kind of symphony, the sound of survival. I stopped often, sat beside a young father holding his feverish son, shook hands with an elderly blind woman who recognized my voice from the news, then burst into tears. "Thank you for coming here," she said, her voice trembling. "We never thought someone like you would remember us." I didn't know what to say, so I just held her hand, tight. We turned into the inpatient wing, an old section, paint peeling, lights flickering. And that's when it happened. My foot slipped. I lost balance, almost fell. "Careful, floor's still wet," came a voice behind me, soft, but unmistakably familiar. I turned. An older woman stood there with a mop in her hand, wearing a faded blue hospital uniform, her hair tucked under a worn cloth wrap. She didn't look at me. She just bowed slightly and said, "I'm sorry, sir. I meant to keep walking." But that voice, it didn't just warn me. It pulled me back into a childhood I thought I'd locked away for good. I stood there frozen, not because I almost slipped, but because my heart had just stepped into a memory. I wasn't ready for... "What's your name?" I asked. My voice cracked, and I didn't know why. She looked up. For the first time, I saw her face, lined with age. But those eyes, I had looked into them while burning with fever, while curled in pain, while crying for a mother I couldn't touch. "Loretta, sir, Loretta Mae Johnson." I heard the name like wind sweeping through my soul. Loretta Mae Johnson. That name was the first pebble to shake the mountain I had buried for decades. Chapter 3. The Mop and the Voice I Never Forgot. Loretta Mae Johnson. I repeated her name in my mind, not like a politician confirming a detail, but like a man double-checking the locks on an old door, only to find it already open. "Where did you used to live?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. She still wouldn't meet my eyes, just answered softly. "I grew up in Piney Ridge, Alabama. Moved here to Atlanta later." Piney Ridge. My throat clenched. That wasn't just some random town on the map. That was the last place I ever called home before politics, before the military, before the spotlight. It was where my mother died. It was where the final fragments of my childhood lived, in a silence I'd never dared to disturb. Suddenly, the hospital around me faded. No more squeaking gurneys, no more nurses calling names, no more intercoms announcing open beds. Just the sound of my own blood pulsing in my ears. And her voice soft like a lullaby in the middle of a storm that never passed. Do you know someone named Charlene Ellison?" I asked. "My mother's name." This time, she looked at me, and in her eyes wasn't recognition of a public figure. It was something sacred, something long lost. And now suddenly, impossibly, found. She didn't speak right away, just nodded slowly as if confessing a memory out loud for the first time in years. I knew her very well. I used to look after her son. Those words didn't hit my mind, they struck my spine. Like a cold wind had reached inside my bones and touched the child I once was. I swallowed hard, fought to steady my voice. Are you talking about me?" She didn't answer right away. Then she nodded and smiled. Not the smile you give when you recognize someone, the kind you give when you finally find something sacred you've spent your whole life missing. "You're my little Marcus," she whispered. "You used to call me Mama Retta." And in that moment, the door to my past didn't just crack open. It blew off the hinges. I remembered a woman with calloused hands telling me stories about rabbits and wolves, a bowl of hot cornmeal porridge set by my bed whenever I had a fever, rough, warm hands wiping tears from my cheeks with an old towel and pulling me close, singing slow southern lullabies into my ear. The mop she was holding now looked like a staff propping up an entire world I thought I had lost. I stepped back, not from shock, but because my heart had just recovered a piece of itself. It thought was gone forever. I turned to my assistant, still standing a few feet away, stunned, unsure what to do. "Cancel the rest of my meetings today," I said quietly. I have something more important to do. Chapter 4. Her name was Loretta Mae Johnson. Loretta Mae Johnson. I said her name again this time, like a quiet prayer inside my chest. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I still couldn't believe. I had lived an entire life without remembering the name of the woman who once held me through my fevers. I looked at her closely. Not with the eyes of a politician, not like someone glancing at a hospital worker. I looked at her the way a child looks at the woman who first taught him how to tie his shoes. You still live in Atlanta?" I asked, trying to hide the tremble in my voice. "Mm-hmm. Been working here since '98, she said gently. "Got a small apartment down in Southside. I live with my granddaughter." She said it like it was nothing. But I heard it all in her tone, a whole life lived quietly, modestly, and maybe a little lonely. "Why didn't you ever try to reach out? No letters, no calls, not even when I started showing up on the news." She looked down. Her hands gripped the handle of her mop, as if holding on tight to keep her emotions from slipping loose. "I thought about it," she said slowly. "But who was I? Really just a woman with a mop. No family name, no title. Who was gonna believe me?" Then she looked up, and this time, she didn't look away. Her eyes were steady, not defensive, not ashamed, just calm. The kind of calm that only comes from someone who made peace with being the forgotten chapter in someone else's story. "All I needed was to know that you were alive, that you were strong. That was enough for me." That's when I couldn't hold it anymore. I stepped back, leaned against the wall, and felt the breath leave my body like someone had quietly knocked the wind out of me. All those years on podiums, all those standing ovations, all the ribbon cuttings and breaking news segments, but not once had anyone ever reminded me that I was loved in silence like that. I need to talk to you more," I said softly. "Somewhere quiet, no cameras, no appointments." She smiled, but not the kind of smile you give a governor. It was the smile of a mother finally hearing her lost child say the words she's waited a lifetime for. "Home. My place is small, baby," she said. "Ain't nothing fancy, but there's hot tea and memories." I nodded without hesitation. Hot tea and memories, that's more than enough. When I stepped out of that hospital, the clouds had broken. People still called my name as I passed the exam rooms. Nurses still bowed slightly. Doctors still offered polite smiles. But I didn't hear any of it anymore. There was only one voice in my head now. My little Marcus. That day, I didn't go back to the office. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a governor or a symbol. I felt like a man on the road back to the place where his heart was once patched together. Chapter 5, Penny Ridge was never just a place. Loretta's apartment sat in an aging suburb on the south side of Atlanta. No electric gate, no security booth, just a faded wooden fence and a tilted hibiscus bush catching the last light of day. I didn't arrive in a motorcade, no cameras, no headlines. Just me and a question that had been keeping me up at night. I used to call her Mama Retta, but how could I forget? The door creaked as it opened. A wave of herbal tea drifted out to meet me, blended with the scent of cocoa butter and old wood. I stepped inside. The room was small, tidy. A few embroidered cloth paintings hung on the walls. Loretta sat in a deep armchair, wearing a rust-colored dress, a picture frame resting in her lap. 2 teacups sat on the table, one already sweetened with honey, like she somehow knew I still liked it that way. "You remember Piney Ridge?" she asked, without looking at me. I froze. Piney Ridge. That name smelled like red clay after rain. It sounded like crickets at night. And Sunday morning church bells from a chapel too small to echo. I had never gone back, not once, after my mother died. And they took me away. Piney Ridge disappeared from the map of my heart. But Loretta's voice brought it back with just one question. "Do you still have anything from that place?" I asked, surprised at how badly I needed the answer. She nodded, then slowly rose to her feet. From a wooden cabinet, she pulled out a small oak box with a hand-carved crescent moon on the lid. When she opened it, my breath caught in my chest. A tiny bracelet made of wooden beads and seashells. I reached out, hands trembling, and the moment my fingers touched it, a wave of childhood came crashing over me. I saw myself at 5 or 6, wearing the bracelet, running down the hillside of Piney Ridge, singing made-up songs into the wind. I saw Loretta kneeling beside me, pressing crushed leaves onto my scraped knee. I saw her carrying me through a summer storm, our torn umbrella barely covering us both. "Your birth mother, Charlene, made that bracelet for you," Loretta said softly. "She gave it to me just before she passed." I looked up at her, and for the first time in years, I didn't see a janitor. I saw a part of my body I hadn't known was missing. "I remember this," I whispered. "I used to count the beads when I couldn't fall asleep." Loretta smiled, and in her eyes I saw a mirror reflecting back all the pieces of myself I'd forgotten. "Piney Ridge wasn't just a place," she said slowly. "It was where you were loved, before the world knew your name." And with those words, I understood something deeper than memory. I hadn't come back just to remember who she was. I came back to remember who I was. Chapter 6. The bracelet in the wooden box. The bracelet sat in my hand, light as nothing, but the way it pressed on my chest, it weighed as much as a forgotten heart. Tiny wooden beads, threaded with pale seashells, faded with time, and yet, as my fingers moved over them, one by one, the dark nights of Piney Ridge came rushing back to life. "I want to know what happened. When my mother died," I said, my voice hoarse. Loretta sank slowly into her chair, like someone trying to hold a storm in their chest. Her eyes weren't on me, they stared past me, through time, back to a night long ago, when a small wooden house on the edge of Piney Ridge fell into a silence too heavy for words. That day, Charlene got weaker. She began. She couldn't eat anymore, couldn't sing, but she held your hand and smiled. I didn't remember. Or maybe I chose not to. Maybe the pain was too much. Maybe when you're that young, you learn to lock memories inside a box and pray no one ever opens it. Charlene knew she wasn't going to make it, Loretta said, her voice trembling. And she wasn't scared for herself. She was scared. You'd be left with no one. Her hands clenched tightly around her knees, as if bracing herself to relive it all. I was her closest neighbor. No blood, no claim, but that night, she called me over, held my hand, and whispered, "If I don't wake up, don't let my baby sleep alone." I felt my chest tighten, not from pain, but from the strange familiarity of it all. As if I hadn't just heard it, I had lived it. But from the other side of memory, she passed the next morning, Loretta said, her voice slow, like water dripping through stone. "I held you in my arms. You didn't cry. You just asked, 'Is Mama sleeping?' And I said, 'Yeah, baby, she's dreaming something beautiful.'" I lifted my hand to my face. There are tears that don't come with sobs, just the quiet trembling of a soul being woken. "How long did you keep me?" I asked, not daring to look up. "Almost 2 years." She said, "I fed you, put you to bed, taught you ABC with a wooden board. You used to beg for the rabbit and wolf story every night, Mama Retta. Tell it again." I laughed through the tears. I remembered. The rabbit and the wolf. I used to think it was just a dream, but now it was proof of a love that had been buried deep beneath success, speeches, and spotlights. "What happened?" I asked. "Why did I leave you?" Loretta was quiet for a long time. Then she spoke each word like it had to be pulled from a wound that never quite healed. "Your father's family came. They said a child should be with blood. I had no rights. They took you, didn't let me say goodbye." The room fell silent. Only the sound of passing cars outside and tea cooling in our cups remained. I didn't know that. I whispered, as if confessing a sin I didn't even know I carried. "I don't remember leaving. I don't remember who pulled me away from you. All I remember is that I went quiet after that." Loretta looked at me, and for the first time, her eyes didn't just hold gentleness. They held forgiveness. "Children aren't the ones who forget," she said. "Grown folks choose that. But the heart, it always remembers. It just waits for someone to knock again. Marcus." I slid the bracelet onto my wrist. And in that moment, it didn't feel like I was putting something on. It felt like something had come home. And so had I. Chapter 7. Mama Retta, the name I once called. Mama Retta. The words slipped from my mouth, and my heart stopped for a beat. Loretta looked up, and in that moment, her small apartment in South Atlanta became the front porch of Piney Ridge again. There were cicadas buzzing, dust rising in the heat, and the laughter of a child swinging from a mango tree, shouting, "Mama Retta, look at me." I sat still, the bracelet still wrapped around my wrist. My fingers quietly traced each wooden bead, smooth, familiar, like they had never been forgotten, even if I had forgotten them for years. "You called me again," she said, her voice trembling. "It's been so long since anyone called me that." I wanted to say something, but my throat tightened, so instead I just looked at her. Not as a governor, not as the head of a state, not as a polished black man in a tailored suit, but as little Marcus. "I don't know why I forgot," I whispered. "I don't remember your voice, or your cooking, or the way you held me when it rained. But I remember the feeling. The feeling of being loved without having to earn it. Loretta nodded. She opened a drawer and pulled out an old blue wool scarf. The edges were frayed, but the scent was still there, a scent I couldn't name. But my body knew. "You used to sleep with this every night," she said softly. "It soaked up your tears the first time you asked where Charlene went." I touched it. It was soft, slightly damp, and somehow heavy. Heavy with all the questions I never got to ask. And now I finally had someone to ask them to. "Why didn't you come find me when I grew up?" I asked. "When I went to military school? When I was on TV? When I won the election? You were my mother once. Why did you stay on the outside?" She didn't answer right away. She took a sip of tea, set the cup down slowly, like it held something fragile inside. "Because a real mother doesn't need a title," she said. "I just needed to know you were okay. I watched your interviews, clipped articles, prayed every night, every year on your birthday. I made that spicy butter rice you loved. I shared it with the kids in the complex. Not because I thought you'd come back, but because I never left." I don't know when the tears started. I just knew that inside that quiet room, I was living part of my life again, not through memory, but through feeling. "I want to make it right," I said, "not with money, not with houses, not with awards, but with presence. I don't want to be someone who was raised and then forgot the one who raised him." Loretta smiled, but this time it wasn't a soft, sweet smile. It was the smile of a mother who finally sees that her child has grown not in height, not in wealth, but in the only place that matters the heart. "If you really want to make it right," she said, "then don't forget that name again. Mama Retta, you once called me that. Now call me again, and don't let it fade this time." I nodded. "I promise." That evening, I left her apartment just as the sun began to set. No motorcade, no aides, just me with the name Mama Retta resting softly on my tongue, and the sweetness of it returning after nearly 30 years of silence. Chapter 8. I'm a governor, but also a son looking for his mother. On the drive back to the governor's mansion that night, I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't say a word to the driver. I just stared out the window and realized Atlanta at night didn't look the same anymore. The streetlights still glowed gold, but now I saw them lighting up the alleyways, the quiet corners where women like Loretta lived, the ones who raised entire generations in silence, the ones this city never put in the books. I used to believe I came out of the system, that I was a shining example of black success. But that night, for the first time, I had to admit something else. I didn't rise on my own. I was lifted by a woman with a mop in her hand. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. My secretary, Ruben, looked at me. Surprised, I was already at my desk. No coffee, no morning briefings. "Schedule a private meeting with the director of Grady Hospital," I said, "and the state HR director as well. But first," I handed him a sheet of paper, just one name written on it. Loretta Mae Johnson. I want to initiate early retirement paperwork for her. I said, full pension, full honors, same as any long-serving state employee. And find me a small, quiet apartment, modern, safe, near a school if possible, not far from Grady, and make sure it has a yard big enough for hibiscus flowers. Reuben nodded, no questions asked. He didn't need an explanation. This wasn't policy. This was a debt. That afternoon, I drove myself back to Loretta's neighborhood. No security detail, no reporters. Just me and a simple basket of gifts, herbal tea, a new wool scarf, and a folder with a red seal. Loretta opened the door, same earthy cotton dress, same calm eyes like she already knew I'd come back. "What are you doing here, baby?" she asked. I lifted the basket, half joking, half serious. "Brought you some tea, a scarf, and maybe a new future." We sat down at her table. I opened the folder, every section carefully marked. Official retirement papers with honors, lifetime financial support, relocation to a fully equipped apartment. "I know you'll say you don't need any of this," I said before she could speak, "but I need it. I need to know the woman who carried me for 2 years will now be able to rest." Loretta was silent for a while. Then she nodded. "If you really want to do this, then I'll accept it. But only if you promise." She looked at me, and for a moment, I was a muddy little boy again, caught red-handed for ruining my Sunday clothes. "Promise you'll never disappear again." I smiled, nodded. "I promise, Mama Retta. And not just a phone call. I'll visit. I'll sit and listen to your stories. Eat your spicy butter rice like I used to." That evening, we shared dinner together. Spicy butter rice, hot tea, and a small cornbread muffin, crispy, sweet, cinnamon warm. No ceremony, no national anthem. Just quiet love finally called by name, after all these years of being forgotten. Chapter 9. Don't you ever call my mother ordinary. 3 weeks later, the state of Georgia held its annual ceremony honoring the silent citizens, those who serve their communities quietly, without recognition. I had never attended it before. My secretary usually went in my place. But this time I personally selected the honorees. I wrote the speech, and I made sure it was broadcast live across the entire state. The hall wasn't glamorous, no fanfare, no celebrity performances. But that day the entire room stood as I walked onto the stage with no script, no teleprompter, just a heart full of something I hadn't spoken aloud until now. In the front row, a silver-haired woman sat trembling in a simple sea blue dress. "Mama Retta, I stand here today. I began not as your governor, not as a retired Marine colonel, but as a child, raised by a love that never asked for a title. And today, I want to speak about a woman the world never mentioned, but whom my heart never forgot." The room fell silent. "Her name is Loretta Mae Johnson, a janitor at Grady Memorial Hospital. No college degree, no social media profile. She never once appeared on television. But she was the one who held me the night my birth mother died. The one who wiped my nose when my sobs had no words. The one who taught me patience and what it means to love someone with no conditions attached." I turned and looked at her. Mama Retta was crying. "We live in a world that worships the spotlight, But the truly great souls, they live in the shadows. And if anyone has ever thought that Mama Retta was just ordinary, I stand here today to say, don't you ever call my mother ordinary. The applause began soft at first, then swelling until the whole room rose to its feet. I lifted a framed certificate, the highest civilian honor in the state. Not for a war hero, not for a billionaire, but for a mother, whose name had lived only on a hospital uniform for 20 years, Loretta M. Johnson. And starting today, I said, there will be a foundation in her name, the Mama Retta Fund. It will support foster mothers, guardians, and women caring for children not born of their body, but loved as if they were. The room fell quiet again. Then one black woman stood hand over her heart. Then another, and another, until every woman in the room was standing. And Mama Retta's tears fell on that medal not because of honor, but because for the first time in her life, the world heard the whisper of women like her. Chapter 10. The Mama Retta Foundation and the Mothers Without Names. 3 days after the speech, the Georgia governor's office witnessed something unprecedented. Over 12 undated handwritten letters arrived. Not from investors, not from journalists, but from women of all ages, backgrounds, and places. I raised my sister's child when she was struggling with addiction. I never had kids of my own, but I took care of 3 neighbor kids while their mom worked night shifts. I never thought someone like me could ever be called a mother. Thank you, Mama Retta. From Alabama to Mississippi, from the Bronx to Oakland, voices once silent began to rise. Not to demand, but to be acknowledged. That love without paperwork is still real love. The national news picked up the story. Late-night talk shows began to discuss it, and for the first time, women who had never shared blood with a child finally had a place to stand. They were no longer invisible. They were the mothers without names. The Mama Retta Foundation was opened in a small building that once served as a preschool chosen personally by Loretta. Outside, on a wooden sign, hung a single hand-carved sentence. The one who gave birth to you is not always the one who loved you like a mother. Loretta didn't go on TV. She didn't have social media. But once a week, she'd visit the foundation. She'd sit with young women, help them file paperwork, select photos, write thank you notes. And whenever a visitor stopped by, she'd simply smile and say, "I'm no legend. I just made sure one little boy didn't sleep alone the night his mother passed." One afternoon, I visited the foundation and walked into a moment that nearly brought me to tears. She was sitting in a circle of young women. They called her Mama R. One was asking how to help her toddler take his first steps. Another was proudly showing off a photo of her niece learning her ABCs. "This little girl's my sister's baby." One young woman said, "She calls me Mama now, but my sister hasn't come back. Probably never will." Loretta didn't say much. She just pulled her into an embrace and told a story I had once heard. There was a little boy, raised for 2 years by someone no one ever acknowledged as a mother. I watched her, and I understood. The Mama Retta Foundation wasn't just a program, It was a community built from souls the world tried to forget, but who never stopped loving. Every year, on my birth mother Charlene's birthday, we hold a gathering. No RSVP, no formal invitation. Just one requirement. If you've ever held a child who didn't carry your blood but loved them like they did, you belong. We call it the Day of the Mothers Without Names. I don't know how many women like Mama Retta there are across this country. Maybe tens of thousands, maybe millions. But now, I know one thing for sure. They are no longer silent. They have each other, and the world is finally listening. Chapter 11. Returning to Piney Ridge. Piney Ridge. Once, that name was just a vague line in my political biography, a placeholder to fill the blank space of hometown. But today, it was a call, a whisper back home. We left at dawn, a black SUV weaving through the winding roads of the American South. Mama Retta sat in the back seat, wearing an old floral dress and a faded earth-toned scarf, the same one she said. It's Piney Ridge color. Baby, the color of home. I used to think going back was about nostalgia, but somewhere along that long road, I realized returning is survival. Because when you don't go back, you live with half a memory, and a man who lives with a broken memory can never truly be at peace. When the old wooden sign appeared, "Welcome to Piney Ridge," my chest tightened without warning. "Mama, do you still remember the smell of the soil here?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. She cracked the window open, breathed in deeply, then smiled. The dirt still remembers its people who tend to forget. We pulled up to a small wooden house, paint peeling, roof slightly caved in. But the mango tree out front still stood tall. I stepped out, reached toward the trunk, fingers brushing the bark. "This tree," I said, "is where I used to hide from you whenever I didn't want to eat my greens." Mama Retta burst out laughing, and her laugh in that silent, sacred place sounded like church bells. Neighbors began to gather, not because I was a governor, but because little Marcus had come home. An elderly woman emerged from the house next door, eyes dim, back bent, but her voice was clear. "You're the boy who used to roll around in Loretta's front yard." "Right." I nodded. She reached into her scarf and pulled out something wrapped in old cloth. Inside was a tiny wooden spinning top, worn at the edges. "You made this from a soda cap and a broken chopstick," she said. "You showed it to the whole village. I kept it because I believed one day you'd return." I held the toy in my hand, and I wasn't Governor Marcus Ellison anymore. I was a 6-year-old boy with bright eyes and a heart that hadn't been hurt yet. We passed the old village well, where Mama Charlene once washed my shirts by hand. We crossed the open field where Mama Retta used to tell stories under the moonlight. Each place, each scent, each voice put the broken pieces of my memory back in their rightful place. "Are you angry with me?" Mama Retta asked, as the sun dipped behind us. "For not being able to keep you..." I looked at her. She didn't need forgiveness. She had done the right thing in a world that never gave her the right to choose. I'm not angry, I said. I just wish I'd remembered sooner. But Mama, what's left is still enough to know exactly who I am. We sat on the old front porch, beneath the mango tree. The evening breeze carried the scent of dry leaves, and in the distance, children ran and laughed. One little girl dashed past us, then paused, turned, and stared curiously. "Who are you?" she asked. I was about to say, "I'm the governor," but Mama Retta smiled and answered for me. "That's my little Marcus. He once fell out of this tree trying to pick mangoes for me. Now he's back, picking up memories." That evening, the sun set in a deep red hue as if to say, "Some circles in life take a lifetime to close. But if you're patient enough to return, you'll find every wound already knows the way home." Chapter 12. A medal that never hung on her chest. A week after our return to Piney Ridge, I went back to Mama Retta's small house on the edge of Atlanta. This time, I didn't call ahead, no driver, no aides, just me and a small reddish-brown wooden box with a single word carved on the lid. Mother. She was in the garden, watering her hibiscus, wearing a worn cotton shirt, linen pants, and garden gloves. "What brings you out here today?" she asked. Not even looking up, politics finally gave you a day off. I laughed, then quietly placed the box on her porch table, right beside her still warm cup of mint tea. "Today, I'm not here as anything," I said, "just a son, bringing a gift home to his mother." She pulled off her gloves, wiped her hands on her apron, and slowly lifted the lid. Inside was a medal, red and gold, simple, solemn. No state seal, no organization, just one engraved sentence. "Thank you for loving when no one required you to." And beneath that, presented to Loretta Mae Johnson by the child who once fell asleep on her pillow. She froze. Her hand trembled as it hovered over the medal. "You know," she said, eyes still locked on the box, "for years." There were nights I'd stare at the moon and wonder if it still remembered me. I had no words. I sat beside her, silently. This medal should have been presented on a big stage. I said eventually, with cameras, applause. She shook her head, smiled faintly. "Real love doesn't need a stage. It just needs to be believed." I laid my hand over hers. There was nothing more to say. We sat in that silence, listening to the wind graze the tin roof, the sparrows chirping from the power line, the gentle clink of a spoon in her glass of lemon tea. And that was the most sacred award ceremony I've ever attended. No one knew it happened. No photos were taken. No hashtags trended. But somewhere, I believe Mama Charlene was smiling, and she knew the woman she chose to hold me through those cold nights. Never let go. I used to think I was the product of success. Now I know I am the product of quiet care. Mama Retta didn't hang the medal on a wall. She closed the box, and gently placed it on the small altar next to my mother Charlene's photo. "She gave you to me," she whispered. "Now we'll both hold on to this as a promise that love, real love, never disappears." Chapter 13. The boy they called Marcus. I've stood before thousands, signed bills that shaped the futures of millions, walked through war zones, parliaments, international summits. But the hardest speech I've ever had to give is the one I'm about to read today. This is the launch of my very first book. Not a political memoir, not a book on economics, but a story with just one title: Mama Retta, the mother America never mentioned. I walked onto the stage, holding a slim paperback, no suit, just a plain button-down shirt, and a small photograph tucked in my chest pocket. A picture of me and Mama Retta in Piney Ridge. I was born in Piney Ridge, in a wooden house with a leaking roof. My birth mother, Charlene, passed before I even reached first grade, and from that day on, I was raised by someone you won't find in any textbook. Her name was Loretta Mae Johnson. Everyone called her Mama Retta, a woman with no children, no property, but she had what this world is starving for: unconditional love. The hall was silent. I looked out over the crowd. Some elderly faces held back tears. Some young people scribbled furiously into notebooks. I tell this story not because it's extraordinary, but because it's so ordinary that we've forgotten how sacred it is. If you've ever been held while running a fever, if someone walked you through fear, washed dishes for you after a failed exam, and you never even asked for their full name, then maybe you're like me, a child who was loved by someone who didn't share your blood. I paused, then read the closing lines. The boy they called Marcus is grown now, and today he just wants to say one thing, not to America, but to the child he once was. I haven't forgotten. I've come home, and I will tell her story, so no one ever has to live in silence again. As I stepped down from the stage, Mama Retta was no longer in her seat. She had left earlier, quietly, as always. But I knew she'd watch the broadcast, flip through the pages of the book, and smile softly as if to say, "So, you told it. Now I can rest easy." This story doesn't end with death. It doesn't end with medals. It doesn't end with applause. It ends with something far simpler. A grown child, finally remembering the name of the woman who once called him her own. There are people who never showed up in your graduation photos, never stood beside you when you won an award, never had their names etched on any of your medals. But if you flip through your memories, they were always there, wiping away your first tears, holding your hand through fevers, teaching you how to stand again with the gentleness of someone who had no obligation to love you, but did anyway, as if you were their whole world. And if today you still haven't called them back, still haven't said thank you, still haven't realized that the person you became was built on the quiet love of someone who mothered you in the shadows, then maybe it's time to go home. If this story touched something in you, a memory, a regret, or just a face you never learned the name of, leave a comment. Share your story, or simply write the name of someone who once loved you silently. Because maybe that name is the thank you they've been waiting for. This is Tales of Black, where black stories aren't rewritten in spotlights, but retold through memory, through tears, and through love that was never properly named. If you saw yourself in this story, hit like, hit subscribe, and let's keep walking on this path to find the ones who loved us long before we knew how to say the word love.